Well, what's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you another video today. Major 1, Week 1 qualifiers were this weekend. Weekend 1 of 2 for the CDL in terms of seeding for Major 1. It was an absolute banger. In this video, I'm going to cover my 5 takeaways from the weekend. Let's dive in. So number 1, we were back on Twitch this weekend, and I think if you take a look at these viewership numbers, I think it really supports the decision that was made by Activision. Viewership was tremendous throughout all 3 days of the matches. It looks like we averaged close to 125,000 viewers across the 23 hours that the matches aired over those 3 days. So that's amazing. I think way better than anything we've seen online in terms of YouTube for non sort of event broadcasts, and a lot of really good variety if you look at sort of the matches that peaked. I mean, obviously OpTic's always going to take a couple of top spots, but you know, that banger matchup on Sunday between Atlanta FaZe and LA Thieves also did particularly well. You had some good viewership for like London versus LAG, bro. Really, really good viewership, I think, throughout that weekend. I think for me, you know, on top of sort of everybody tuning into the mainstream and getting your drops, I think the other opportunity that really did well throughout the weekend was the variety of people, including myself, who were co-streaming the matches and sort of collaborating with other creators or other pros, you know, on TeamSpeak on Discord. What was interesting to me is that on Friday, you know, I was hanging out in a call. It was me, Parasite, obviously my boy Tommy, my duo. We had Pat in there, we had Nate Shot in there, a bunch of other people. Zen came in, and Zen actually made an interesting point, which is with this sort of avenue and the sort of communication they've gotten from the league. Like, the league is down for players. If you're not, you know, if you don't have a match on that day, or even if your match is over and you want to hop on, like, you can stream during matches as long as you're streaming matches. You can collaborate, have conversations with your audience. If you just played, maybe post game, do a little bit of Q&A with your audience, collaborate with other, you know, people out there. I think the potential here is unlimited. And for me, you know, as you know, the product, as we get later in the season where maybe some of the matches online aren't as important as some of the early season matches, I think the spirit of community is what really keeps the Call of Duty community vibing and moving. And I think leaning into this and keeping this option open for all creators, for pros, what have you, I think is really key. So I'm curious to see what the league does with any kind of official co-streaming opportunity or program. All right, my second takeaway is this weekend in general kind of flipped the coaches polls and some of the power rankings on its head. I don't know necessarily if at the top of those rankings, you know, between like Thieves and FaZe and a couple of other teams are to like top 4, top 6. Maybe there's a little bit of a swap in order, but I don't think people are going to really drop out of those rankings. I think more so sort of the middle to bottom of the ranking, I think is going to shuffle a lot. Like, you see at the top of this list, like Minnesota, Boston, London, it's the 3 teams that are 2-0. I don't know if anyone predicted that. And at the bottom, we've got Seattle, Vegas, and New York, and we'll talk more about their performances later on in this video. But I expect this to be really murky going again into next week. With only 4 matches, you're going to have a lot of tiebreakers. Again, everybody's going to go into pools, so no one's really in danger of starting in loser's bracket or being in a weird situation. But the seeding for Major 1 might be a little bit funny. We might get some really weird and interesting, maybe stacked kind of group of deaths as we get towards the Major 1 cycle. But, you know, at the moment, I think for a lot of teams, there's some interesting narratives, and we will dive in on those. Like, for example, I don't think, and, you know, shout out to my boy IO Turtle as always for the sheet. Like, I don't think anyone predicted that London was going to be the best SND team after the first weekend of COD. I could predict Rocker being up there. I think we could see that. Boston being 2-0. I think they're always, and have been putting in the work and been well disciplined, but bro, these stats for London are crazy. Their round win percentage, offensive prowess. They won 90% of their offenses, bro, this weekend. Like, that's actually absurd. I don't know if it's sustainable, obviously, but for London, I think, who a lot of people had 12th in their standings, you know, myself included, I'll raise my hand on that one. Then they proved a lot of people wrong this weekend. Now, it's one weekend. You got to carry this, especially into the event, to make sure you execute there. But for London, I think they're doing the right things as they continue on the path they're on. They might, you know, make things very interesting in the standings. The next takeaway I have is sort of the differences and how different I think this game right now, and even in this sort of M4 meta, I think maybe especially because of the M4 meta, how different this game is playing as compared to Vanguard in terms of stats. So across the board, interactions and matches are way down in terms of kills and deaths. I don't really have the exact number or stats on that, so if someone has that, please leave that in the comments. But by the eyeball test, like, it's down. I don't know if it's double digits down from last year, but we're not seeing like crazy 40, high 40 bombs, low numbers, especially in respawn. But very curious to see where we're netting per game, per 10 compared to last year. Hard point, playing a little bit more kind of hold and rotate. Again, I don't know how sustainable this is going to be throughout the end of the year, but just to kind of give you a sense of sort of the difference between this year and Vanguard. You know, I'm showing you kind of the stats from this season so far, and we've had 33 50-point hill holds in 21 matches. That's about 1.5 per map, give or take. Actually, it might be slightly a little bit more than that. And if I show you the stats from last year, we had 243 across 356. So that's about what, 0.7. So we're almost double the amount of 50-point hills that you were seeing last year per map. Now, again, I don't know if this is going to hold. Is this part of the M4 meta? Is this a comfort thing with the game? I think that remains to be seen. Right now, this is playing, I think, a little bit more like World War II or maybe sort of the early days of Black Ops 4, as opposed to the last couple of years where you've been seeing a lot of people kind of break heavy. The only team I think that really kind of pulled it off this weekend was OpTic in that one map against Florida on Mercado. But for the most part, Hearts points have been very much about discipline. And I actually think it's made some of the endings on these hard points really exciting, especially on maps like Mercado. It's going down to the last couple of hills like 200, 200, or 250, 220, 220. I think it's going to make for a really good spectator experience, in venue. I also think it's going to kind of pace the game good for the casters and the observers. We'll see if this holds right now. I don't think the M4 is going to get, at this point, GA before Major 1. I thought it might a few weeks ago, but I think a few pro teams have sort of held the line there. So this meta is at least going to stick, I think, through the end of the year. And sort of the last kind of stats thing that I noticed, and this one might be a little bit surprising. Right now, through the first weekend, offenses won 46% of offenses, and in Vanguard, that number was 26. But right now, a lot more offenses being won on Control. Now, it seems like a bunch of this is being driven by El Asilio. But even the win percentages on Hotel are pretty good. And Fortress, I think it's going to continue to be a defensive sided map. But honestly, like right now, even though I kind of think that Fortress should go as a Control map once we get a better map to replace it with, I do think that we do have some good variety right now in Control from the offense defensive side of map. So it should make for sort of an exciting Major 1. People may not realize that right now Control is playing a little bit more offensive heavy than last year. So I can't really break down all the teams in this video for sort of my fourth point, but I want to focus in this one on sort of the three teams that didn't get a win this weekend. And let's highlight kind of where they struggled and I think what they should focus on going into Major 1. Because for me, again, when we talk about the 4 matches teams are going to play, I look at this as pure practice for that event because, not everybody's playing the same teams. Not everybody has the same schedule. I think these 2 weeks are about understanding your weaknesses as a team, improving those, and then the real test. The real test is when people pull up, do Raleigh, and actually show their gameplay on land. Let's talk about the 3 teams that didn't win a match this weekend. We're going to start off with Vegas, and I thought they played pretty good, especially in hardpoint. They had a couple of close losses there. To me, I think pretty obvious looking at their stats. Control is a problem. I've been saying that for weeks. They didn't really win one in the 2 matches against Thieves and Florida whatsoever. And by the way, it was not like just on one map. Like they got smoked on Hotel by Thieves, and they played an El Asilio that went to round 5 against Florida. I think honestly, Vegas probably could have won that map if they made a couple of more plays. This to me is going to be Vegas's weak mode. I just think they got to put the time in. They don't necessarily have, I think, especially at the sort of Proloot and TJ sort of level. I don't know if they necessarily have those type of players compared to like a Simp and a BZ. Who are going to be sort of naturally very good at this game mode. And they're going to need to execute their strengths elsewhere. But they need to keep putting the time in and try and get a little bit more towards 50-50 in this game mode. I'm not actually looking too much into the SND stats. I thought that they played, 2 tougher SND opponents this weekend. Thieves are obviously a very good SND team now after being, not that good in the beginning of last year. And Florida, I think on paper, should be a really good S&D team. But I think for Vegas, I want to see that a couple more S&D wins next week, and then we'll see kind of where they net. But I expect that this team should be well prepped in S&D. Maybe this week didn't really show it. So that's your path forward for Vegas. They play FaZe and Minnesota to close out next week. 2 really tough matches. Let's see if Vegas can get at least 1 dub in that. And again, improving those 2 game modes going into Major 1. But they're still going to get in the pool, so no problem. Just get your practice in. Next up, we have the New York Subliners. And honest for me, this is probably the most disappointing team of the weekend. If I had to pick one team that I think was, probably the worst, unfortunately, it would be this one. It's really not that competitive in the 3 series they played. They got absolutely world starred by London Royal Ravens in their first match. And then Toronto kind of turned on the Jets, gave them the Gentlemen's 3-1 after losing map 1. It just seems like this New York team's not on the same page, man. Like you watch them play and they're just not organized. I think especially, and I have been harping this drum for a while now. It just seems like Hydra is kind of doing his thing and they're trying to play around him. I just don't know in this meta if that's going to work. So I think New York's got to put in a lot of work over the next week or so and try and get to a better spot going into their matches next week. Like the Control was just horrific this weekend. I think they only won like 1 round of Control across both maps, and they only played Hotel S&D, so we'll maybe see if they were better on some other maps. But even on the hotel. Like, again, they didn't look particularly comfortable or played well in either of those maps. I'll say though, not to kind of give a little bit of credit, I thought they were actually pretty good. They played 3 hardpoint maps. They got blown out in the last one against Ultra, but I think the momentum was on their side. They looked pretty good on their first 2 hardpoint maps. But being good in one game mode is not really going to cut it at this level. Like, you can't just be a hardpoint team and say, let's get it. I mean, look at London last season. Like, they were a good hardpoint team at the end of the year, but they couldn't win a control. They kept bottling game 5 SNDs. Like, it's just not going to have a lot of win conditions. So let's see what New York can do with their matches coming up next weekend against LAG and Boston. And then Seattle was also 0-2, but honestly, this one was kind of harsh. I actually think they didn't play super bad. The one thing with Seattle, surprisingly, I think 0-3 in SND, and the end of last season, you see kind of how they end up sort of losing at champs, and that was sort of on the backs of sort of weak SND play, and it's kind of continued again at the beginning of this year. I think we'd want to see some improvement in this game mode. They have a lot of really good individual, like 1v1 players. Lamar keeps his team organized, and last year, especially at the beginning of the year, they were very organized in SND in their situations, and it didn't seem like they were super on the same page this weekend. And like, to be fair, they lost 1 in round 11, 1 in round 10. The only one they weren't super competitive was that last map against Gorillas. I will say it's possible that Seattle kind of got iced along with maybe LG with that really long delay before map 5, but right now I'm curious to see how they can turn it around in SND next weekend. But other than that, and the reason I'm not really worried super much about Seattle is like the respawn game modes, they look good. I think this team, if they can just get a little bit more of that about in SND coming into next weekend, they will go ahead and face off against London and Toronto. So I actually think, as good as both those teams looked last weekend, I think they're good enough for Seattle maybe get a result, maybe go 2-0 or 1-1. But I'm not super worried about Seattle come Major 1. They just got to improve their SND, and I think they'll be good to go. I think my last takeaway from this week was all the stuff for OpTic and just them really kind of having a cold shoulder to the league. I mean, prior to this weekend, I think Hector was, and I think rightfully so, to an extent, a little bit frustrated with, I think, developers about this game. I think some of the functions of CDL, and he's talked a little bit about that in the OpTic podcast. If you want to go take a look at those, they're always a good watch. But this was an adventure of a weekend for OpTic Texas. As you probably know, they played Minnesota Rocker in their first match, and they did not play out the series. There was a whole controversy in map 3 with Minnesota Rocker kind of using a G8 streak and him getting stuck in it by accident, and they asked for a replay, and then they got it, and then OpTic got upset, and they basically packed up and left. And then yesterday when they won against Florida, they decide not to do an interview. As you see here with Puckett. By the way, I haven't talked about this, but Puckett's back at the host. That's a massive W. He's an OG if you've been watching esports for a long time, and he did a really good job on the desk this weekend, so I want to give him a shout out. But as you see from this Puckett tweet, we got no OpTic interview this weekend on the Florida match. I'm very curious to see what happens here. I'm sure there might be some conversations at the team management level with OpTic to see if they can figure out whatever, kind of gap there is between the two parties, and maybe they can bridge it. I will say OpTic was like promoting the stream all weekend and sort of doing the normal stuff on Update. But let's see if they can improve relations here, because as you guys know, OpTic definitely drives a lot of viewership, and if they can kind of see what the issues are and get those sorted, I think we're set up for a really good year. Yeah, that's the video. A really fun first weekend of CDL. I had a really good time streaming and watching it. We'll have more content breaking down stuff from this week as we go throughout the week. Final thing that I want to talk about, where we did get the 8 teams coming in from the qualifier on the challenger side this weekend for the play-in tournament the Wednesday prior to the event. A bunch of really interesting results on there, and I'll cover that in a video later this week, and we'll talk about kind of maybe my predictions, see which 4 teams might make it through to the pro side of the event starting on next Thursday for Major 1. It's like, bro, it's coming up super quick here. Like, I'm actually mind blown. As always, guys, let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Like if you enjoyed the content, subscribe for more. Really excited to keep pumping more out for you as we get closer to Major 1, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you all so much.